Welcome back once again. This is official Wednesday, 11 p.m. Central European Time chessbrah lecture. Tonight I'm going to teach you how to demolish CARO-KANN in a modern fashion. CARO-KANN is definitely considered to be one of the most solid openings in the world. You know that Karpov was its main representative. Nowadays you have literally all top players who used it at least once or even more on the top level. So it's really hard to crack opening. Tonight I just opted for the two knights variation, and it goes like knight c3, d5, knight f3. This variation wasn't that popular until the mid of the last year. Going over the web and searching some games and preparing for some games in my league, I actually came across with a game of one Chinese player, Lu Shanglei, who crushed somebody in Qatar Masters last year. He really made a great game there. I'll show you that game in this lecture. And even more interesting is that even though Nigel Short has been playing this variation for almost 15 years very successfully with white pieces, until recently this variation wasn't that popular. Anyways, let's get started. So after knight to f3, black has wide range of possibilities here. Black can go with three main lines. The main one is bishop g4. Apart from bishop g4, black can go with knight f6, and on a regular basis, out of 10 games, probably 7 games I play against d takes e4. And by the way, in my opinion, this one you're gonna like the most, and that's why I especially enjoy this variation playing white. So after knight f3, let's get started with probably the most logical move here. It's d4. What simply happens if black pushes this pawn up to d4, threatening knight on c3? You just have to go back to e2, threatening the pawn d4. And now they have two options: to play regular move c5, defending the pawn on d4, or just to go for a side move d3. This d3 move is bad because instead of developing themselves, they just carry on with some wild attempts, but then you just put your knight back to c3, and after d takes c2, queen takes back on c2, and now you just want to push the pawn to d4, taking the center. After c5, very nice and active approach by white here, d4. Thanks to this move, white immediately gets a huge opening advantage. They have to take, knight takes, and this is interesting tactical choice. Of course, black has to play now something like a6 or knight f6 or anything like that, something more or less flexible, where they would just stop knight b5 and bishop b4 by white. But on the most obvious, queen takes d4, you just have knight b5, threatening queen, threatening this bishop, and also threatening knight c7 if they just, for example, move the queen back to d8. So you have knight c7 where you win the rook and you win the game. After knight d4, I just have to stop here and to say this is much better position for white, thanks to big advantage to white, thanks to huge development advantage, and also a couple of tactical abilities, including the one I showed you with a queen takes d4. So this is why black has to play after d4, knight e2, c5. After c5, you just undermine this pawn structure. Another typical. By the way, last couple of months, on regular basis, I've been using this variation with white pieces, and I just have to say that I rarely lose any games maybe couple of losses, couple of draws, but I believe I have like 80% of wins. I'm talking about mainly blitz games, 3 and 5 minute games. I'll show you also a couple of games against grandmasters here on chess.com, official ones, and one was entitled Tuesday. I pretty easily demolish all my opponents there. Not to mention some games by really good players, like top world players, where, for example, you'll see Nigel Short crushed CARO-KANN and Carlsen crushed Grishchuk. So let's go there. After c3, they can't play d3. They have to play knight c6, defending the pawn. If they play d3, you just go with knight f4, threatening this pawn because it's under the attack by 2 pieces. And it's interesting, they cannot defend a d3 pawn with c4. Simply, if they play c4, you go with queen a4, and this check actually wins this pawn on c4, and afterwards you're going to even win the pawn on d3. So this is completely winning. This is why they have to play knight c6, and after you capture, they capture, you play queen a4. After queen a4, I immediately have to say, according to the engines, this is almost winning for white, because there is no defense for the d4 pawn and it's just fallen. So if they play, they have to play bishop d7. If they play e5, white just captures the pawn on e5 since the king is pinned. Also, sorry, the knight is pinned. If they go with like d3, you just go with knight ed4. Now this pawn is threatened by bishop takes d3, but also we actually pin this knight and the king on e8, and we want to win any of these pieces. If bishop d7, bishop d3, they don't have time for knight e5 because of bishop e5, and if they play knight takes d4, you just grab by queen. You won the pawn. You didn't win pawn on the edge of the board. You actually win one of the key pawns in this game, and you actually won the central pawn, which makes this position winning for white. After bishop d7, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, you just have to put your queen back to a3, or at the moment you're just threatening to play knight e5. Never mind, whatever you do here, you're just almost winning, because you won a pawn very easily. So just like I said, the most logical move, knight takes d4, loses on the spot. Maybe not loses on the spot like in terms of you're going to mate your opponent or whatever, but you just win a pawn. So knight e2, and if they play c5, c3, knight c6, very nice tactical pattern, pinning the knight and the king, and basically winning the d4 pawn. So that is the first line. Second variation here could be the line where black actually goes for e6. If they go for e6, you just play d4. This would lead to French, where, guess what? On whenever French, someone goes and plays c6. That simply doesn't work. So what I'm actually referring to right now is, imagine you play French opening, and after you play knight c3, somebody plays c6. That would be just terrible, and things don't work like this. Actually, this immediately gives you huge development advantage. You should carry on developing yourself, knight f3, and position would be much better. So that would be just a bad French for black. Finally, after like e4, c6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, apart from d4, which is obviously bad, apart from this e6, which obviously leads to an improved version of win-over French for white, and actually a really bad French for black. They can go for, speaking of these side moves, they can go for d takes e4, knight f6, and a bishop g4. Those are not side moves, actually those are the main lines. So this is why I just came across these two moves after knight f3, d4 and e6 that fast, because these two moves are just bad, and after these two moves white easily get a huge development and also a huge advantage in terms of even engine assessment. So after like knight f3, black has three main lines. They have to play, the main line is bishop g4, but for example on my level, whenever I play this variation against anyone, they just go for d takes e4, and they rarely go with knight f6 and bishop g4. Bishop g4 is usually used by top theoretical guys and really strong players. Knight f6 became popular recently thanks to some games by top players, but results by black are not that good and convincing. And finally, let's get started with most interesting line here. It's d takes e4. Using this line last couple of months, I can tell that majority of my games, CARO-KANN games, went on and played against this continuation. So after I captured on e4, black can play two moves, knight f6 or knight d7. Black can play these two moves going to the main line. So whether they play knight d7 or knight f6, we're just going to transpose into the line that we will thoroughly check in this lecture. But before that, what happens if they just play some bishop to g4? Then you just chase away this bishop with h3. If they capture, you have an easy bishop pair advantage and bishop c4 thing. For example, they go knight d7, you go d6, they play knight g and f6, and after bishop c4, e6 castles, this is just an easily better game. I remember MWL, Vashil Lagrave, played in Pro League here on chess.com one game. I believe he played queen e3, and thanks to bishop pair and the pawn majority on the queen side, he easily won that game against 2600 GM. So this is one of those easy advantages for white. That is very safe type of game without any risk. This is why almost everyone goes with, after knight d4, either knight d7 or knight f6. Here bishop f5 doesn't make much sense. Because many CARO-KANN players are used in a classic variation where they go and play bishop f5. Since you play knight to g3, chasing away this bishop, and after like bishop g6, you play h4. So when they play h6, you do not play here. That's very important. You do not play h5, because here the point is not just like in the main line where white has d4 to kick this bishop away with h5. Actually, you need this square for your queen. Sounds crazy, but yes, that's the way it is. You play knight e5, chasing this bishop away on g6, and once they move this bishop away, you now threaten to play like checkmate. So when they play like g6, you now threaten bishop c4 checkmate here, and when they play e6, you go back with like queen to f3. This is terrible position for black. Bishop being shut down here on h7, pawn on f7 that is hanging, threatening checkmate, even queen that can easily slide along the third rank on b3 and going against e6 if needed. This is just a terrible position. I remember I analyzed this position the other day because I played against somebody here on chess.com, and after f6 I played queen g4 threatening both. When my opponent captured check, they went here. The only move was this one, and after just a sec, bishop f7, king e7, queen e6, it was checkmate. I was about to say queen takes b7, but I actually mixed that up with some other variation. So it's very nice line because it's checkmate. They can't stop losing any of these pawns. For a long time, I haven't seen a worse position after 10 moves for black. So that's why we never push this pawn to h5. That's why we never do that. Just like in classic variation. But in classic variation, we just have that pawn on d4, and then situation is completely different. After like bishop f5, once again, for all those who are used on a classic CARO variation with bishop f5 in the main line, here that has nothing in common for black with a classic variation, because after knight g3, bishop g6, h4, h6, you play this key move knight e5, and I insist the pawn is not on d4, which makes actually a great improvement for white in this line, and also gives you an additional tempi in terms of attack and mating here. I just want to tell you one more thing. After queen h5, they can't play queen d5, because in that case you just play bishop c4 and queen is under the attack, just like the f7 pawn. So that's the point. White is completely winning. After knight e4, black can play for two variations. Black can go for two variations. So knight d7 or knight f6. For all these years, this variation has been very normal for both sides. I remember I used to play CARO-KANN, and I never considered this two knights variation as anything that dangerous. But after knight e4, knight d7, last year in Qatar Masters, in open tournament, that Chinese guy, Lu Xianglei, whose games I like very much, found out this very nice idea. Actually, this idea was found out way before that game, but this whole variation and this whole concept wasn't used before this game that much. So after queen e2, for example, I just want to remind you, for all of you beginners, low-rated guys, and for all of you who like bullet games, if your opponent plays knight g on f6, you get a smothered mate. So don't forget about this one. I won a couple of my games. I won a couple of my games playing like this. Anyways, that's the way to go in this variation. So after like queen e2, that's why they have to play knight d on f6. And after knight d on f6, you just probably you're wondering how can you get very attacking and very entertaining position here, but this is the move. After this pretty nice looking move, we transpose into the main line. So what is the main line? The main line is if they now, for example, you now threaten knight g5. If black, for example, goes for g6, you just play knight g5 with such a great position, really huge development advantage. Queen c4, queen f3, bishop c4, c3 followed by d4. A lot of difficulties for black to complete development. Possibility if they play knight h6, bishop g7, short castle to go with typical h4, h5 wing attack, and that actually makes this position great for white. After knight e5, since we threaten this move, knight g5, in some Backhouse chess, you can even play knight f7, knight g5, or even bullet, hyper bullet chess as well. They have to take on e4, you take by queen, and all these guys on regular basis go with knight f6. And this is the main line. And this is the main line. And in this main line, such a refreshing move that actually put this variation back into the modern and one of the most fashionable lines at the moment in the world was bishop c4. It's nice because black cannot take on e4 since you have this very nice checkmate f7. Of course, no one will ever, I think, blunder this mate against you guys, but you don't have to worry about that. This position I played in more than probably more than 30 or 40 games so far. I don't remember that. Maybe I lost one game playing either bullet, blitz, rapid. I haven't played yet tournament games in this variation, but I don't think anyone would be able to do anything here. But I'll show you a couple of my games here. I played here on chess.com against two GMs, and those were 3-minute games. I checked those games with the engines. I also analyzed this variation pretty thoroughly by myself and with a couple of my students, and results are impressive. After queen e4, by the way, I just want to remind you, they cannot play typical CARO move, queen takes d5. You usually have this queen exchange in many of these CARO-KANN variations, but here it simply doesn't work. It simply doesn't work because after queen d5, white is just going to take on d5 and play bishop e5. You can't cover yourself with bishop d7. You lose a piece. If you play king d8, knight takes f7, followed by knight h8. This is why they have to play knight to f6. So once again, for all of you who face knight d7 here, play queen e2. A lot of times, and in majority of these games, your opponents will think that you're a very cheap player who just wants to mate them on d6, delivering smother mate, but that's not the case. That's not the case. Actually, that would be very nice if somebody blunders this mate, but I think it's gonna rarely happen to you. But after knight d on f6, you just play knight e5. Knight e5 is nice move, not only because it threatens knight g5, but it gives you also, actually prevents bishop g4 by black. So that's what I like here. Apart from this knight d7 line, this is why most of players, CARO players, go for knight f6. This is the main line, and this is what everybody does. Once again, you do the same. Queen e2. One of the key fashionable lines by white lately, thanks to this move, is this one. Mainly thanks to that game played by very original Chinese player. Once again, I mentioned his name, Lu Shanglei, who used it and crushed his opponent so bad. We're about to see that game. So, just like I previously told you, literally everyone goes for knight takes e4, hoping to take a tempi after knight d7 and knight f6. Literally everyone. But you know what? Apart from this, they can also go here for knight bd7, where you come up with this mate. Then they can go for bishop g4, which is nothing. But you have to remember one nice thing here. You play h3, and if they bishop h5 is more or less expected. If they play bishop f3, you just take on f6. This is a nice desperado move. Actually, that's how we called intermediate moves. And after g takes f6, queen f3, you guys all know that playing with the bishop pair, playing with a better pawn structure guarantees like very simple advantage by white. So here white is easily better in this situation. After queen f3, queen d5 looks like a typical CARO-KANN move, but brings nothing. You just play queen b3. This leads to a very pleasant, slightly better position for white, since after queen takes b3, a takes b3, open a file, bishop pair, and after all healthier pawn structure, give white fairly easy middle game. If you're happier, we can call this endgame, but it's actually far from endgame still. So this gives white a very, very simple middle game. I know that most of you would like always and all the time to make your opponents immediately, but sometimes simply it's not gonna be possible. Anyways, in this variation, I very much like this queen b3 move, because now we threaten on b7, we threaten bishop c4. They simply have to take, and they have to go into this endgame. Just once again, a file, nice bishop pair, and definitely better pawn structure gives white much better game. Finally, if they play bishop h5, you once again go for knight takes f6, g takes f6, and here you just have to make one strong positional move that once again differentiates this variation in comparison to the main and classic variation where white has pawn on d4 already. You play d3. The strong positional move gives your dark square bishop some space and an open diagonal. The strong positional move is there because you want to play next g4 and play against the light square bishop. So I'll repeat it once again. In middle games, you guys should put your pawns on the same color of opponent's bishop if you want to restrict it. In endgames, never, because then your pawn will be under the attack. So here white has a pleasant type of positional advantage, and this would be very, very nice position. So that's why they take, and when they play knight d7, we just go for typical bishop c4, and when they go knight f6, once again knight e5, going and transposing into the main line. But before that, I'd like to show you queen d5. This, at first sight, hyper solid move leads to long-lasting edge for white. So you just played queen h4, queen e6, bishop e2, queen g4. I remember analyzing this game, and I was quite surprised, and I thought that black already equalized here with the queen g4. But here, strong positional move by white. Queen goes to g3, and after queen g3, h takes g3. I was an official commentator of the European Club Cup last year in Novi Sad, where I broadcasted live battle between two strong players, where white went on for this promising queenless middle game and eventually won in a classy endgame style. That was the game between Etienne Bacroix from France, one of the top French players, and Robert Kreisel from Austria. So in the game was c5, and after d4, e6, bishop e3, knight d7, long castle. To all of you, I just have to once again repeat. You got an open h file, so it makes your position very strong here. Then, guys, you have like 4 pawns against 3 pawns on the queen side, which gives you a pawn majority advantage. And you just have a huge development advantage. This is why Etienne Bacroix managed to win his game fairly easy there. And also, we've been witnesses of the game in Pro League on chess.com between David Howell and Grandmaster Rasmus Swane from Norway, where Howell beat his opponent playing b3. This is nice because you cannot take the pawn on c2 since after bishop c2, d3, and this bishop is gonna get captured. So after like knight d7, bishop e2, e6, castles, h6, knight h4, and g4, David Howell went on and won this queenless middle game fairly easy again. So Pro League, we've been commentating that for like a couple of weeks, actually for more than 2 months. And in the Pro League, We had like so many good theoretical games and novelties, including, for example, this one that we use right now in this demolishing CARO-KANN lecture. So this endgame is definitely easier and better for white. So it happens after queen d5. But you know what? According to my experience, and I have like pretty good experience in this variation, just like I said, played more than 30 games there. I believe that queen d5 is better attempt by black to equalize the game than knight d7. Actually, knight d7 cannot even equalize. But everybody, absolutely everybody, goes for knight d7. This is move that is very typical for all CARO-KANN players. All CARO-KANN players are familiar with knight takes c4 and knight f6 ideas, just like the French Rubinstein guys who all the time like to take on e4, simplifying the game, and then they go with the knight f6. So you once again go with the bishop c4, knight f6, and here we go, the critical position. Russians used to say tabia position, which means like initial critical, the one where actually the crossroad of one variation. Thanks to this attractive move, this whole line became so popular, and judging by my experience over the web and in a couple of rapid tournaments, it really guarantees white more than promising attacking chances on the king side. They have to play e6. After e6, queen e2. And now I once again have to stop. This is the most common CARO-KANN position that I play on almost, just like I said previously, on a regular basis when I play these two knights opening. Almost everybody goes for this, and I crush literally everyone. For example, couple of players tried to remove this pretty much annoying knight on e5. Yeah, I call it French knight, because this is French pawn structure, Scandinavian pawn structure, or CARO-KANN pawn structure. But usually it happens in French, and absolutely the best positional piece, and you know, in such games, is the knight on e5. So remember, when you play against French positions and you want to get like a strong piece against this structure, you should just put your knight on e5. Just like I said, a couple of players have tried knight d7 against me, trying to remove this French knight from the center, but it costed them a whole point immediately. This could be a good puzzle for mainly lower rated guys, so I can give you here like 10 seconds and you just have to find the move. This could be like the first puzzle for tonight. I'll be patient. We're almost on the half of these 10 seconds. And there we go. Knight takes f7. King cannot take because, of course, queen and the rook are threatened, so this wins on the spot. If king takes f7, this is immediately checkmate. They cannot touch the knight, but in that case, they're just going to lose. In the best case scenario, rook on h8. So this is nice trick. I also had a couple of guys and a couple of games where they played b5, bishop b3. I actually keep my bishop on this diagonal, keeping this threat if they move the bishop. And since the c6 pawn was hanging, one guy tried this, and I came up with pretty much the same idea. After this, you come up with this check, and here you don't have to be and trying to be that smart. You just play queen f7, attacking the king, winning the bishop on b7 back, and being up like 2 pawns with a healthy pawn structure, bishop pair, exposed king in the middle of the board. The mate is coming soon. So that's why they can't play like this. And by the way, don't forget, this is typical f7 tactics. They all play bishop d6. You play castles, you give your opponent a chance to take on e5 if he's willing to play much better middle game for white. They all play castle, and you play d4. Here we have to stop. Now I have to show you my game. I played it here on chess.com. It was a 3-minute game. I would never show you any of these games. I actually played more than, just like I told you, 30 games. Here I'm only going to show you 2 of those because those are really good ones, and I check all these games with the engines because I don't want to show you really bad ones, whether they were played by myself or my opponents, but these ones are really good ones. So in the first game, my opponent went for queen c7. It's quite a tricky and quite a sneaky move by black. They just want to play c5, undermining my knight on e5. I don't want to play c3, in which case they would have a possibility to take on d4 and create an isolated pawn on d4. No, I don't want to do that. So this is why I have to play rook to e1. With rook e1, I support the knight on e5, and basically I fight versus c5 by black. So when they play c5, we always take on c5, and after bishop c5, let me just show you one of my games there. I played bishop f4, bishop d6, and of course, by the way, with the bishop f4, here I'm threatening knight takes g6, discovered attack on both of these heavy pieces. So they just have to play bishop d6, and after bishop d6, rook a to d1. Rook a to d1, threatening rook takes d6. So after b6, they have to complete their development. Look at this. We actually put all our pieces right into the center of the board. We now threaten to take on d6, and that's exactly what happened there. So after b6, rook takes d6, queen d6, knight g6, threatening queen and rook, queen c5, knight takes f8, queen takes f8. I played queen f3, bishop d7, bishop e5, and this is one of those very pleasant moments for such openings. You get a pawn majority, bishop pair, attack on the king's side. You have no structural weaknesses. Your king is not under the attack, so why shouldn't you go for a position like this? After rook c8, bishop to d3, knight d5, removing from bishop f6, a3. Nice positional move. You just want to kick this knight away from the center, from the d5, and you just want to do that with c4. So once you play c4, they wouldn't have knight to b4. And because if we don't have a3 and they play knight b4, you would have to put your bishop back to f1, defending the pawn on c4. Now if I play c4, I'm just going to retain my bishop on strong diagonal b1 h7. So after bishop c6, threatens to move that knight somewhere, probably knight b4 for example, to remove one of the bishops, and queen h5, threatening mate in 1. I just analyzed, for example, here black has to play h6, but after c4, knight e7, bishop c3, white would have an upper hand here. We would have just the possibility of going with a rook lifting. We have like 2 powerful bishops, queen that is almost mating the black king, and this is much better position. But my opponent went for g6. It's quite difficult position because he had to defend his position all the time. I went for queen h3, and it turned out to be a very important decision. He went for bishop e7, opening his rook on the c file, and that's a very correct move. c4, kicking this knight away from the center. Knight c7, not knight e7 probably because of some, actually pretty much the same ideas. And here I realized I could be very tricky and go with rook lifting. You'll actually see that my rook lifting is one of my favorite ideas. And in this already desperate position, my opponent failed to find the most accurate defense, and he went for queen c5. You know what? Here I had an ace up my sleeve and pulled out something which allowed me to get a good feeling and get joy, like I was on the beach drinking mojito with few Victoria's angels beside me. So guys, what did I do in this position? Actually, it's always better to drink those mojitos with Victoria's Angels rather than checkmating your opponents, but okay, in terms of chess, this is good enough. So it's white to move. By the way, this was my game against Russian GM here on chess.com. So what did I do here? Exactly. So queen takes h7 right in his face, and after he actually he resigned immediately, because if he takes, rook takes h3 followed by this beautiful checkmate. It's a typical mating pattern, but actually a beautiful mating pattern is with the queen h7. In this, like you see, that was pretty easy game. Everything was very logical, and then I played another game. This was game entitled Tuesday. My opponent went for c5, d takes, bishop takes, bishop g5, bishop e7, rook a to d1. This is a very similar position to Rubinstein, typical Rubinstein line in French. It's just out of curiosity to remind you, it's e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3 or knight d2, where black takes on e4. By the way, I just like to show you one more game played by myself in these positions. It's the game, but before that, let me just show you that game played by Lu Shanglei. I actually mentioned that guy a couple of times. After his opponent went for bishop e7. This Chinese guy went for c3, wanted to go with d4, maintaining knight on e5, and of course getting the center and having this pawn on d4 protected. So after like knight d7, Chinese went for h4. I like this one a lot. Announces crazy attack on the king side. What actually happened in the game? So after knight takes e5, d takes e5, c5. Looks everything very normal, but now white played pretty much paralyzing move. He went for a queen to e4. It stops b6. It stops bishop d7. It gives white bishop d3 and gives white something much more than that. Gives white much more than this. After bishop d7, once again, I can give you puzzle time here so you can find this one, but this is, in my opinion, just for like high rated players. It's very, very easy to blunder this one. Even this guy who was an IM probably completely missed the following option by white. So it's white to move. What would you play here? Just like I said, this is higher level tactics. It was the move bishop h6. It's crazy move because you simply threaten to play bishop d3 or queen g4, winning at least, in the worst case scenario for white, rook on f8, but also opening up possibility to play rook to d1 or to play castle and take control of the d file. After like bishop h6, for example, if they take, you just have to find this one bishop d3, because they can defend the checkmate on h7. I mean, they have to play f5, e takes f6, and that just leads to devastating consequences for black. So after like f5, e takes, rook takes f6, long castle. He continued in a great tactical fashion to play this game. Rook takes h6, he took on b7, took first on a7, and after this played king b1. Just like I told you in previous lectures, I remind you of king b1 after you play long castle is always more than precise continuation. it's like one of those prophylactic moves that you simply gotta consider to play always, and you'll never make mistake if you play king b1, but you can always regret if you miss the king b1. So after like queen f8, rook takes d7, king h8, f3, queen f5. I'm showing you the game, and this was just a very brutal execution, even though those were like obstacle bishops, but here he had like easily better position, and after this won this game very easily. That was the game I referred like a couple of times during this lecture between Lu Xianglei and Mohammed from Doha Masters 2015. Sorry, I said previously 2016. So that was really good one. I just want to show you one more game of mine played in this variation. For example, in one of my games, my opponent went for knight d7. So we've seen what happens if c5, that it's typical of Rubinstein variation where you take on c5 and play bishop g5 followed by rook a1, rook f2 e1. You already have like great French knight on e5. You're going to most likely put your bishop back or use the rook lifting going for the g3 and h3 and launching the attack on the king side. And you just have to keep considering that pawn majority gives you another great thing and advantage in this position. Just one more thing. After bishop e7, rook e1 leads to similar positions to typical Rubinstein line, but this is even an improved version, because after like queen c7 I can play bishop to d3, and now you don't even manage to play this one because we have checkmate and winning the rook. Once again, very typical tactical trick for the French and CARO-KANN positions. But let me just show you what happened in that game of mine. My opponent played queen c7, trying to undermine me with c5. I have to support this knight on e5 and fight against c5. And I showed you that game where my opponent played c5, and that's how it went there. But you know what? They can also play the knight d7 instead of queen c7. So this is another game. This is another game of mine played here on chess.com, titled Tuesday. Bishop f4, queen c7. He once again wants to undermine my knight with c5, so I had to play rook e1, controlling and defending and protecting my knight on e5. After knight takes, d takes. It's always very important to take by pawn in such situations. First of all, you do not simplify your game. Secondly, you just get some space in terms of attacking on the king side. And after bishop e7, I went for the rook d1. I came up with, once again, astonishing finish and executed my opponent in a big style. So look at this one. He went for b6, probably wanted to play bishop e7 and c5, but doesn't have time. Rook lifting, it's one of my favorite parts of the game. Rook d8 makes sense. He wants to simplify and wants to go back into defense. I played rook to g3, threatening the bishop h6. He played bishop f8, and position looks hardly breakable, but actually it's completely winning. I went for bishop h6, king h8, went for queen g4, threatening mate on g7. He played g6, played here, threatening this rook, and all of a sudden I was threatening queen h4 followed by rook h3. He went for not that desperate attempt rook d5, because if I get greedy and if I win, if I win an exchange and take this rook on d5, he's gonna get a bishop here, and he's gonna get at least some chances to defend himself and also get some activity, since he's got an option of recapturing by e or c pawn. But I played bishop f6. He went for king g8, and once again, very similar trick. I'm threatening very similar to the previous position, not immediately rook h7, because eventually he's gonna have defense with the bishop h6. And after he played h6, removing all those kind of tricks, He probably thought his position was defendable. I went for g4, and when he thought that he would defend this position, this is another puzzle for you guys. I'll give you like 10 to 15 seconds. Just like I said, I came up with marvelous finish here, and probably I should be very thankful to my opponent who helped me to make a blitz masterpiece here. So what did I do? This is puzzle time, probably third or fourth puzzle for tonight. I get mostly in the chat room answers like, for all of you who are still thinking here, rook h6, no rook h6, queen takes h6, and after he captured, just once again, similar mating pattern with the bishop on f6 and rook on h3, just a bit different in comparison to the last game. And this is how I won once again in this variation. So let's just make a conclusion about this variation. You know what? If in this variation they go for d takes e4, and I guarantee majority of your opponents will play this one, you take by knight. And now, whether they go with knight f6, where you play queen e2 and come up with this modern mate, or whether they go with first knight d7, you always go with queen e2. So when they play knight f6, you just play knight e5 threatening knight g5, and if they take, you take knight f6, bishop c4, you get a killing position. Even though Anjan says this is just a slightly better for white, I think you've got an upper hand here, and it's very simple for playing, believe me. And apart from that, they can just go, for example, for knight f6, but this just transposes into the same line. So when they play, they cannot play knight bd7, remember this one, they have to take knight d7, bishop c4, knight f6, and we reach the same position that we analyzed before. I just want to remind you one more time that in my opinion they should play queen d5, going for typical and standard CARO-KANN queen exchange variation, but after queen h4, queen a6, bishop e2, queen g4, I'm actually referring to game of Baccarat against Kreisel, and the game that happened here in Pro League between David Howell and Rasmus Swane here on chess.com, where both of these guys, Baccarat himself and David Howell, won fairly easy in a classy queenless middle game and endgame styles. So this is why I think that you should like this variation so much. And let's now check two more lines. There is line with knight f6 and line with bishop g4. What about line on knight f6? This variation gained some popularity lately for black, but thanks to Nigel Short, even Magnus Carlsen, I say even Magnus because even Magnus used this variation a couple of times and won his games. E5, knight e4 turns out to be the only move. Here, after knight f to d7, I can give you an interesting opening, typical opening puzzle. So how should you play in similar situations, especially in CARO-KANN games? You should always go with this e6 move. So this is typical CARO-KANN pawn sack that leads to a massive initiative for white. After f takes e6, you now get a center. And there are two options. They can play g6 or knight f6. If they play g6, in my opinion, it's going under the attack. We just go with h4. Looks like won the normal, typical bullet game. But after you play h4, bishop g7, h5, white seems to be a lot better. There was a game between two GMs where black tried to open up the game in the center. Knight g5 threatens knight e6. Very annoying jump by this knight. And after knight f8, queen goes to f3 with devastating attack for white. So that's why even engines here propose knight f6 for black. But here white has one very, very interesting move. At first glance, it might look completely crazy, completely anti-positional, but it's nice. It's a very attractive move that is aimed against g6. It's h4. This move is mainly there to stop and prevent g6 by black. So if black, for example, goes for g6, you play h5. Now they don't have time for knight h5 because this is one of those typical bullet tactics. You just play knight a5 and mate after queen h5, or serial material loss is inevitable here by black. So all these variations are really, really good for white, and they actually make black forcing to play knight e4. They're compelled to play this variation. And here Nigel Short recently, actually I believe 4 days ago in one open tournament, played bishop e2. So last week Short used this variation versus someone and won a pretty easy game after knight takes c3. Here white has two options, to play b takes c3 or d takes c3. Nigel went for d takes c3, but I think even b takes c3 after bishop g4 castles and d4 gives white a fairly easy game. You know what? You have an idea of rook b1, even rook c4, rook b3, and you know, because sooner or later they would probably give up this bishop for the knight. Then you have to retreat this bishop on this diagonal. You have to play rook to b1. You got to open up the game because you get a bishop pair, and maybe you can even use rook lifting afterwards and go for mating attack. Nigel played d takes c3, and after bishop g4 went on with the knight g5, bishop e2, queen e2, threatening e6. His opponent played e6, bishop f4, and this is brand new game. I very much like this a4 move. It tells his opponent, first of all, announcing that he won't give an easy time to black, even if he castles on the queen side, and he's just sending a message to his opponent, no man, I'm not gonna let you slip easily tonight, because here long castle, short castle is hardly gonna happen because you played h6 and weakened the pawn structure around the king, so it gives white a pretty good chances in order to attack. But also, if you want to go for the short castle, what happened in the game, then Nigel went on with queen a3 and crushed his opponent after some rook to d1, c4, and so on. So that game happened 4 or 5 days ago in some open tournament. I'm not sure, I just remember I saw this game somewhere. Even searching for this game in the online database, I couldn't find it. But I remember I found it, there was a live stream somewhere and I just saw this game and it was nice. But you know what? All these top players after 94 play this a little bit bizarre move. This is unstandard retreat that threatens to win the game on the spot. It's very interesting. You just want to play d3 and win this knight on the spot. Actually, not immediately, because he's going to play knight c5. But then you're going to keep chasing this knight away and get a great position. So after like knight e2, they go with queen b6. And now d4. d4, e6. I'm just showing you the main line. Knight g3, c5, bishop d3. This is important move. So important for white is not to play a very typical move c3, what usually happens in similar situations, because after c takes d4, c takes d4, bishop e4, black would be just good, but to play bishop d3. Now I'm referring to games. One that was played on Gibraltar 2017, so this year, actually 2 months ago, and the game was between Nigel Short and best chessbrah team member Fabiano Caruana. And another game was played between Magnus Carlsen and Grishchuk last year, some blitz competition. But okay, we all know that Carlsen plays blitz way better than, for example, most of GMs do tournament games. Not to mention myself, of course. After bishop to d3, knight takes g3. In a game that I spoke about between Caruana and Short and Caruana in Gibraltar this year, Caruana played knight c6, and Nigel won very, very easily. Out of the opening, he got a great position. Knight takes e4, took by bishop on e4, c takes d4, played castle. Keep an eye on this pawn. And try to notice one more thing. There is no knight on the king side, which gives white a very pleasant attack on the king side and very pleasant type of the game. Reminds me of some Alapin positions against Sicilian. So after bishop d7, a3, to stop any knight before or bishop before when he plays rook e1. That's what he did the next move. Played h3, b4, going against the pawn on c5, stopping some, knight a5 ideas by black, knight c4. And after this, bishop f4. He actually maintained the control of the center of the pawn on e5. And after knight e7, captured the pawn on d4. Pretty convincing game by Nigel Short versus one of the top world players. And once again, I just have to say, strongest member of the chessbrah team, Fabiano Caruana, which makes this line even better and more serious. So this line cannot only be used amongst patzers or amongst low-rated guys, but also I can hear some comments that Li Chao was the best player of our team, but Caruana is the best player because we all know that he's been second player in the world for like last 5 years. After like bishop d3, knight takes g3. This happened in the game between Carlsen and Grishchuk, and after c takes d4, I just have to say Carlsen won this game, but this game reminds me on those unstandard type of French positions where white actually gives up the center and gives up the healthy pawn structure and pretty connected pawn structure, and they don't care, they just lose the pawn, they just sack the pawn on d4 and mainly hope for a good position with this pawn on e5. Afterwards, Carlsen played some g4, king f1, won this game. Just like I said, it was blitz game, wasn't that convincing win because still Grishchuk had good position and failed to get more than, he actually lost that game, but still, in my opinion, this is one of the best attempts for black to go into this variation. But just like I said, you don't have to go for this. You can play Nigel Short's move, bishop e2. You can even play the line with d4 here. But I very much like this one with knight e2. And by the way, don't forget, if they play something like, they can never play this move, bishop g4, because believe it or not, guys, you just go with the knight here and you threaten f3. Not just fork, but he also threatened to start doing a pawn storm and keep chasing these black pieces with a tempi. Anyways, this is very interesting line, but still, according to the latest theory, white is better. And finally, we just have to check the main line. It's the bishop g4. When somebody goes for bishop g4, usually I don't face this move that often. Only good players like title players use this bishop g4. Of course, developing idea behind this move, they just want to develop this bishop before they play e6, solidifying the center. So after bishop g4, h3, they have two moves, bishop takes f3 or bishop h5. The main line is bishop takes f3. Karpov has been using this variation for all these years. But bishop h5, white has so many approaches. Nigel Short went for bishop e2 and won many games. Also, Nakamura, for example, beat Grishchuk in Beijing with e takes, bishop e5, g4, knight e5, d4, h4, chasing away this bishop and playing like this. A bit better position for white. And this game was played 5 years ago, but Nakamura managed to win this game against Grishchuk. Finally, if bishop h5, you can also play d4, what Short regularly uses, and I also prepared a couple of my students this variation because it's very nice and simple for playing. After like e6, you play bishop to d3, then you go with e5, chase this bishop away, capture on g6, and now just because you want to solidify your pawn structure, you play knight e2 on time. So when they play c5, you can hold the center, get like connected and strong pawn structure, and go with your king on f1 and g2, hiding it there and getting a good game. Especially because your pawn on h3 could turn out to be weak sometimes. I'll show you a game between Nigel Short and Alexander Kalifman back to 2001. And after knight c6, Short went for that classic idea with a king g2, queen b6, and rook b1. This is one of the key moments of this variation. You just want to play b4, getting the space on the queen side, and thanks to this move, we can say that if you manage to play b4, you're just going to get like a very huge advantage. In the game was a5 to stop any b4 by white. So after bishop e3, a4, knight f4, Nigel played h4 and eventually played some queen d2, knight g5, winning this game nicely. Also, this knight on f4 can sometimes go back to d3 and even support the game in the center. But he went on with a queen d2, knight g5 and won this game against Halefman. So that line is really good, and I think against bishop h5, e takes d5 variation that Nakamura used against Grishchuk, it has been used so many times so far, but it looks like more scary for black than it really is. Especially, I know that because I used to play this line with black, and it's not that bad for black. But I think the line with d4 has like more of sneaky variations and options for white, and also bishop e2 looks so dull, looks so unthreatening, but it's not like this, believe me. And finally, if they take on f3, and when they take on f3, you just play queen takes f3. Wassila Graf had in Pro League, previously mentioned, a game where his opponent played d takes e4. Here, black can go for typical and the main line e6, but apart from this move, they can also go with d takes e4 and d4. Whoever plays d4, you just play bishop c4 with a tempi. They just have to play e6, and now you play knight to e2. Very typical way of developing your pieces. White has much better game. After like d takes e4, we had this transposition in one of the previously seen positions, knight d7. It stops bishop c4 because of knight e5. Please don't blunder this one. So you just play d4, making both of your bishops open, stopping any knight e5 in case you now play bishop c4, getting the center, of course. And when they play knight g on f6, bishop c4, e6, and like I previously told you, MWL had a very similar or maybe the same position in Pro League and won a fairly easy game playing white. Finally, if they play e6, I just want to show you a couple of main alternatives there and main ideas for white. I think this variation has to be thoroughly investigated by both colors, but amongst so many possibilities. D4, bishop e2, g3. I like especially this one with d3. Looks once again very unambitious, but after like knight f6, bishop d2, knight bd7, g4, threatening g5. So after h6, long castles. Just for you, I chose two games. One played between two 2650 guys, which is like really important and very good one to be followed for the future, and one between two IMs. They usually play bishop d6 or bishop b4. Those are the two most common moves. By the way, whatever they do, you just have to go with king b1, h4, and then you will either go with an immediate g5, since the queen on f3 defends rook on h1, or you'll play bishop h3 followed by g5. So when they play like bishop b4, I want to show you this game. They want to play d4 and at least make their position looking a bit easier because they want to play d4. You play a3. I think more logical move would be bishop a5 for black, which doesn't mean this would be a good position still. And after bishop d6, looks like he provoked some weakness on a3, so he can now go back go back to d6 and launch the attack with b5, a5, and b4. So after like h4, queen e7, g5, knight g8, exactly one of the positions I spoke about. After this one, the worst thing is they cannot even manage to take on h1 because we just take first knight on f6 and win a piece. So that's why this guy played knight g8. E takes, e takes. It's very important to open the file. And now he went for knight b5. I like this one a lot because you can't move your bishop there, because now a3 even helps you. Maybe your opponent thought that he would make some weaknesses, but he actually even helped you in terms of knight b5 and bishop b4. That's why black had to play like a6, knight takes d6, queen d6, bishop h3. Powerful bishops, great activity of your pieces, possible attack on the king side. This just gives white a great game. After h takes, knight e5, queen g3, threatening some bishop f4 to win on the spot. Rook c8 wants to face some bishop f4 with intermediate move, for example, like queen c6, and this desperado saves the day for him. And that could be pretty nice salvation by black, but he wasn't naive. He actually played bishop e6. Now he threatened this rook and he threatened this rook by the rook on h1. After like f takes e6, rook h8, rook takes g8. I like this one a lot because he's now just removing the defenders around the king and goes against this bishop. Actually, what was his point? He just removed this king, this rook from the c file, and king cannot take either. You can just check that out. I mean, it's very simple to see why. So after like rook g8, bishop f4, bishop took on e5 and won the game. Finally, this is why most of them either go for bishop e7 or bishop d6. I'll show you the game between the best Croatian player, Ivan Šarić, and ex-Croatian champion Robert Zelčić. So after bishop b4, bishop d6, h4, pretty typical and pretty easy game for white. All you gotta do is h4 and g5. So it's simple. After queen b6, he kicked on with g5, h takes, rook h1, queen h1, knight g4. Had this position a couple of times in my blitz games, and it always looks terrifying because it looks like, oh my god, I'm about to lose some serious material here. But after bishop e2, this knight has nowhere to go because this knight cannot defend it because of f4. So after like knight f2, queen h8, bishop f8, rook f1, knight is in the middle of nowhere, castles. Queen h4 threatened this knight. Zelcic couldn't find the proper defense. He tried with bishop c5, but after knight a4, this guy just removed the defender. Took on f2, played bishop f4, defending checkmate on a1 and kicking away the knight. And since he was piece up, he easily managed to win this game. All things considered, this variation is currently very serious weapon against the CARO-KANN with the white pieces. We could have seen that some real names used it in the past, including current world champion Magnus Carlsen, including Nigel Short, who does this opening on regular basis, including some top young and arising Chinese players. So this two knights variation is extremely difficult for the CARO-KANN players at the moment. That would be all for tonight. Thank you all for watching. Hope you're going to join us next week. And next week I'm just going to teach you, actually I'm not going to tell you what, but you still can send me an email to miodrag.perunovic@gmail.com and keep sending me your suggestions. I would appreciate that very much. We go for interesting openings, gambits, anything you like. Thank you all for watching. That would be all for tonight, and I hope you're gonna have so many nice wins and joy beating and crushing the CARO-KANN as I did in the last couple of months using this line. Bye bye guys.